Welcome to Recross the Paths, where we celebrate the Cube community one conversation at a time. My name is Cade. Today, I get to sit down with Heather. Thank you for being here, Heather.
You're welcome.
It's an honor to have you here. It's very exciting that we got to meet not so long ago at Shoebox, and you had the eponymous or self-titled HeatherCube there, kind of the breakout success of that event.
Yeah. I did not even know I was going to be in the event until a week before it, so it was quite the trip from that to being like the most popular cube at the event.
Sure, it's one of those we were just mentioning here right before we started that you never know what's going to connect with people, but there's something that's really encouraging about when you get to share a project and it resonates in a way that we don't expect. So I feel like I have to ask, so how did that come about, going from right before the event not knowing you were going to be in it?
Yeah, so Shoebox had a sort of like rolling entry thing where they gave everybody a batch number, and the batches were like 8 cubes, and they said like, okay, we're going to bring these in as we get more people signed up. I was told I was in batch 5, and they only had enough people for 2 full batches. Stuff happened behind the scenes apparently, and for the last 4 cubes to fill out the remainder of the event attendance, they picked mine, I guess.
Well, and it sounds like it was a good choice.
Apparently so, yeah.
Have you done other major cube events before this one?
No, this is my first one.
It's like your first as a participant and as a contributor, I guess.
Yeah.
That's really exciting. So, like we mentioned, people just seemed to latch on to the HeatherCube or latch on to the idea behind it. And, every time I heard it come up in conversation, people were saying awesome things about it. They were really stoked to play it. What do you think resonated for players about your environment?
The interesting story here is like on day 1, people were playing it because they were like, oh, it's a 2015 nostalgia. I love these cards. I know the Museum of Modern Cube was also really popular and also got similarly positive reviews for that reason. On day 1, that got enough people to run it 2 out of the 3 drafts. And then on days 2 and 3, it was all the word of mouth from people playing the cube was just so much that people couldn't even get into it on day 2.
Wow.
And then on day 3, the top 8 voted to draft it.
That's pretty amazing.
Oh.
So, like, that was the finals cube then, as it were.
Yeah. So, like, there's kind of 2 stories there. Part of it is, like, the pitch that got people in the door, and then the gameplay that convinced everybody to go rave about it.
Yeah, and we'll certainly unpack it here. Like, do you think of it as, is this a nostalgia cube?
Yes. Like, the reason it's just named after me, the reason it's HeatherCube, is because it is very much based in, like, my nostalgia. I played a lot during, like, that era of Magic. I think I started in 2013 or so, and kind of petered out around 2018 for a while before getting back into the game more recently. And a lot of the cards in this cube are directly from my old collection, including from a lot of my favorite decks from back then. Like, it is very much a nostalgia cube. It is very specifically my personal nostalgia.
That's interesting, right? Because then it's like, this is for me, but it seems to have struck a chord in a way that other people wanted to be part of it.
Yeah. And I'm not surprised by that. I know a lot of people have nostalgia for that era because the game had a huge surge in popularity around the same time I started playing.
You were mentioning some of your own background. Just getting a context of your experience here coming in, I'd like to ask, Heather, why Cube? Like, why is that a way you engage with the game?
Well, I think a big part of it is, like, back when I first started playing, I played a lot of Constructed, and I do really enjoy the competitive aspect of the game. And gradually, I've come to appreciate, like, Limited a lot more over time because of the sort of even playing field it offers. And Cube is kind of like an even more extreme version of that, where you have a lot more control over the experience. And the other aspect of it is I very much like exploring the game in that competitive sense. Like, I like seeing what decks are possible, what can be done within the constraints that competition places on you, and every cube draft is unique. Because I think the ideal of Cube for me is that you're always getting to experience a new environment and discover new things.
Do you still think of yourself as a competitive player, even in a more limited focused environment like Cube?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, a lot of people associate like competition with tournaments and stuff, but for me, it is more about like the attitude with which you're approaching the game. Like, I find playing for stakes kind of stresses me out and makes the experience less fun, honestly. I much prefer an environment like a cube draft where I can try my hardest and push my limits and try and win, versus something like a commander game where often you're expected to like hold back a little for the fun of the table.
You have to like pull your punches, right? You're supposed to win
Yeah.
25% of the time.
I do not know how to do that at all. Don't play commander with me.
Very reasonable. Like, that's tricky, right? Do you think that there's a risk of coming across as spiky, or like, is that something you worry about?
I don't think so. I think part of that is like Minneapolis, I'm a local for Shoebox, has a very active cube scene, and a lot of those players are also players who are or have been involved in competitive Magic. And so that attitude doesn't really usually stand out in those drafts.
That's fair. So it kind of comes with the territory in a way.
Yeah, like I know there are definitely plenty of cube groups I've seen that play much more casually, where it would be kind of awkward, but that's not what I'm usually dealing with. And at an event like the Shoebox main event is for the people looking for that kind of experience. A lot of people who were less competitive didn't bother with the main event and, had fun with a lot of the other cubes people brought in to play in the open play area.
So do you think of HeatherCube as a competitive cube, like really on that side of the spectrum?
I would definitely say so, yeah. It's designed to have a play environment that pushes interesting competitive games. And we'll get into what I mean by that later, but it is very much designed for that kind of competitive experience, yeah.
Sweet. Well, yeah, let's unpack it a little bit. Could you give us the elevator pitch or your overview for HeatherCube?
Yeah. So the elevator pitch I went with for Shoebox was like, this is a 2015 Vibes Cube. You're going to first pick a Tarmogoyf. The most iconic cards from back then should be the cards you're excited to see in the cube as well.
No, I know that this is kind of one of those where often an overview is taken with a grain of salt. So if somebody says, this is a nostalgia cube and you can pick Tarmogoyf, often people roll their eyes like, okay, sure. But what should I actually pick?
Yeah, I played in another like nostalgia cube from that era that had like it was like, oh, there's an Insult Artifact deck. Also, there's an Urza High Lord Artificer in here.
Yeah. Yeah, so a slightly different axis for sure.
Yeah. So that one of the things I was very, very careful about was not including cards that would outshine those. Like I started with they used to call it like the power 2-drop cycle or whatever of like Stoneforge, Snapcaster, Dark Confidant, Young Pyromancer, Tarmogoyf. These big iconic 2-drops that were like the best things to be doing in the formats they were legal in a lot of the time. So I was very careful to not include cards that would outshine stuff like that. Like one of the cards I've been asked about a few times that I don't include is Territorial Kavu, which like I have a domain archetype and it would fit really well in there, but also it's a 5/5 for 2 with additional upside. I don't want that in there because in that deck it's better than Tarmogoyf, and I want Tarmogoyf to be the 2-drop you're most excited to play in that deck.
Yeah, I think you described those as like you want them to be first pickable. Is that still the metric, or is it like you just want them to be good in the environment?
I definitely want them to be like first pickable. I want you to see them in a pack and be like, there's the guy, I want that guy right away.
Is it really just as simple as like comparing each card you're considering adding and going, is this better than, or like, best in class sort of comparisons?
It's partially that. It's partially also like, I'd say, leaning into the directions those cards push you. Like, obviously, Stoneforge, most directly, you need a lot of equipment in the cube to support that. And that's one of the places where I've broken with like the nostalgia aesthetic a bit, is to include more equipment for Stoneforge that doesn't cause problems. And then, obviously, Snapcaster is just very good, but I make sure like there's a lot of cheap spells for Snapcaster and Young Pyromancer to play with, and not too many like cost reduction cards so that Dark Confidant doesn't feel awkward, stuff like that. I know I have a lot of fond memories of these cards, and I want to feel good about playing them again. I want to be excited to see them again.
Is this your first cube project?
This is my first cube project. I guess technically it's my second, but the other one is just a Khans of Tarkir set cube, straight up retail draft simulator, so there wasn't really any design to that.
I don't want to be so dismissive of that. I mean, is that literally just number of commons, number of uncommons, number of rares, or did you make some curatorial choices?
The only change I made there was cutting the fetch lands, because I don't want to buy an extra set of fetch lands when they're not particularly interesting to draft in retail limited.
Khans of Tarkir, pretty accessible price-wise.
I already had all of the cards for it from drafting so much Khans of Tarkir, but yeah, it's a great set, and it's very affordable if you're trying to do a set cube.
So then looking at something like that and coming to HeatherCube, what actually inspired you to build the cube? Was it just like, today's the day, let's do it? Or was there any inciting incident?
I think it was mostly just like finding out about the local community here and playing in a few drafts here, and I wanted to contribute to that. Knowing that there would be people who would play it made it a lot easier to embrace the project. Beyond that, I like the aspect of like reuse here, especially that this is like built on the core of my old collection. I know I have a soft spot for stuff like that, like deliberately like limiting yourself in that way in order to reuse cards that normally wouldn't be of note.
So did you start with your physical collection, or did you start working in a spreadsheet first?
I started by going through my physical boxes and just picking out all the cards that seemed interesting to me. Then cut down from there and added a few other newer cards that I felt would help fill out the cube.
Yeah, so I know favorites can be a broad concept and personal preference, but how do you think about 2015 vibes as you described it?
Yeah, so I was very, very careful about this, and I think that's a big part of what appealed to people about the gameplay. Part of it is card design obviously has like changed in Magic over various eras of the game.
Yes.
Quite a bit. And I think one of the key shifts that we've seen since that era is that cards back then tended to be focused on doing like a single idea or doing a single thing, whereas nowadays designs are very often mechanically oriented to fill multiple roles because of how the production of the game has changed. Like particularly once they started designing for like Arena Best of One, and then even further with the play booster shift, which meant fewer commons in each pack, a lot of cards have to fill multiple purposes to fit the needs of a set. And that wasn't really as much of a thing back then, so cards tended to be very singularly focused.
So then as you're building this, it wasn't like you just set a year limit or like, you know, this nothing printed after this time or nothing printed before this time. It just feels like it would fit here.
Yeah. And I cut some older cards that felt kind of messy design-wise, and I added some newer cards that I felt fit with the game feel in that regard. Like, I guess, not quite the same, but I know some cards I've cut for power level have been, like, or for bad play experience, like, the Swords of X and Y, for example, are both, like, immediately first pickable at this power level and kind of outshine a lot of other more interesting cards, and also the protection is just, like, a thing that'll randomly get you.
Yep.
It's not really necessary to the idea of the card as much.
So what kind of new cards make the cut for you in this cube?
A lot of them are kind of filling holes to support older cards. Like I recently added Iron Shield Elf because somehow this is the first good 2-drop black discard outlet they've ever printed.
Seriously, yeah.
Like the best one before that was like the 2/2 for 2 that you discard a card to give flying once per
Olivia's
turn.
Dragoon?
Olivia's Dragoon, yeah. Like that was like the next best option.
Yeah, truly not a whole lot. You got the Cabal Initiate in Modern Horizons, but then that got like Threshold stuff and Lifelink.
Yeah, that's a good example of like the kind of card I don't want in here, where it's at least they're doing like a fun thing there with combining multiple mechanics, but it's a lot of words and a lot of mechanics designed to support a set theme that's not really relevant to my cube.
Yeah, so then getting something that is clean, or as you said, just does one thing, or like one thing well.
So yeah, like Iron Shield Elf helps support a lot of the like Madness and Reanimator stuff very well, and there's not really a clean equivalent from like the 2012 to 2018 era that I'm looking for. And you can see some similar stuff in there. Again, with the equipment, like I didn't want to include the swords, and I tried having Batterskull in there, but it just kind of got first picked as well.
Yep.
It's just such a house. So I'm running a lot of newer equipment, like all of the Skyclaves and dissection tools as like alternatives that are similarly exciting to go get with your Stoneforge, but will actually get passed to the Stoneforge player instead of just getting first picked and thrown in any deck.
Yeah. I heard some discourse surrounding dissection tools that it is sneakily very powerful.
Yeah. Obviously, every cube is always a work in progress for the most part. But yeah, I'm interested to see. It might turn out that is actually just better than Batterskull, as some people are saying. But I found, like, at least when I played Batterskull, the vigilance was too much. And also, people know Batterskull, so they pick it immediately. And ultimately, the most important thing to me is that the decks are coming together, that people are finding their lane and such. So maybe once people recognize the section tools for how good it is more, I'll have to find a weaker living weapon type equipment, but for now it's doing the job.
Is equipment a particularly challenging lane to supply here just because of the card type itself?
Yeah, there's very few pieces of equipment at this like kind of standard viable power level that I'm looking for. So it's been a particular design challenge, and I'm still not quite happy with it. But obviously supporting Stoneforge is just really important to the cube.
What kind of older cards, I know you're trying to stick into this era, but what older things would you use to supplement your lanes here?
Some of it is just stuff I like. Like, I like Madness stuff. I'm jamming Wild Mongrel in there just because I can.
Because you should.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
But yeah, a lot of cards that are older in there, like Enlightened Tutor and Mystical Tutor, for example, again, are like things that help support the decks I want in the cube. Like the Dragonstorm, for example. The Mystical Tutor is there to help with that.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned Dragonstorm. Storm is one of the things you try to support, yeah?
Yes. So this is a good place to talk about this. I have a lot of what I would term as like quest cards. Like these are things that are not the greatest, but you will feel really good if you pull off a single game win with them.
This is like the dream to live sort of thing.
So like Storm is a deck that's in the cube, but it's very mildly supported and it will not come together very often. But when it does come together, if you win with that, you're going to feel amazing and it'll be legendary.
Yes, like Storm is particularly high risk in some ways, but it's like all of the Storm cards you have here also seem pretty usable on their own. Like you could fit them into other archetypes if you needed.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going for there. Like if you've got your Seething Song, you can just Seething Song out a Glorybringer if you don't have another use for it.
That sounds so good.
Yeah, exactly. I've seen people, Iron Crag Feet walking Ballista for 4. One of the things I've tried to do with these like kind of wackier cards is just include a lot of variety in effects and let interesting things happen. Like Song of Creation in there, I don't even know what people are going to do with that one. But I thought like maybe you could use it in a Storm deck or whatever, but I've seen somebody didn't get a chance to go off with it in their games, but like was like, hey, I can just put Life from the Loam in my deck with this and those combo.
Sure, there you go.
And then somebody else drafted like a Temur Madness type deck and threw that in there. I was like, okay, I discard my hand and put in some Root Wallas and then draw 4 cards.
Oh boy, now we're cooking. If you can Root Walla and get value out of it.
Yeah, and so I love cards like that, like the 5-color Niv Mizzet in there, or Approach of the Second Sun, where it's like, okay, I want to see what you can do with this. I want to see the weird, wacky decks that will be lucky to win a game, but it'll be really cool when they do.
So it really is like you don't have an explicit outlet for this as much as you just want to, like, this is a tool that I want to see if you guys play with in the sandbox.
Yeah, usually I have at least some idea, but I try to keep it like as open-ended as possible. Like I recently put in the Ad Nauseam, and I'm like, okay, I know you could do the deck where you draft a very low curve deck with Laboratory Maniac and Ad Nauseam and try and win that way. But I'm sure somebody's going to do something else interesting with this.
Like, do you try to seed particular archetypes or packages beyond just your main 5, or are these more like one-off cards that you're trying to support?
I have some more like package type stuff in there, but I generally don't like the 2-color archetype approach. Like one of the inspirations for how I've laid out the cube was the way Ultimate Masters is kind of set up, where a lot of themes have like kind of a main color and then various things they can synergize with in other colors. So white, for example, has a sort of blink package. You've got like a couple creatures that bounce stuff, a couple creatures that flicker stuff, and then, there's some blue creatures with good ETBs, there's some black stuff, there's a Demonic Pact in there, stuff like that. Again, it's trying to keep it very open-ended, where like you're not necessarily committing to being in the Azorius Blink deck or whatever. You're like, okay, I'm in white and I picked up a Flicker Wisp because Flicker Wisp is a great card. What can I do with this?
Well, that's really interesting. So just trying to make sure things have enough hooks that they can be played in multiple ways, it sounds like.
Yeah. Like I have a lot of the like discardy stuff as well. Is like, okay, there's some reanimation spells and reanimator targets. There's some madness stuff. There's just a lot of various other cards that like being discarded for various reasons. It's up to you how you're going to combine all that.
So if you're looking for these little synergies, where does combo fit into the mix for you?
Yeah, like this is one of the places where I was very directly, explicitly inspired by the modern format as it existed in 2015 or so, particularly with the Storm deck. One of the things that was really unique about modern Storm in that era was that it was a creature-dependent deck. All of the combo decks in the format were creature-dependent. So whether your opponent's on Splinter Twin or Pod, or on Storm relying on their Goblin Electromancer, as long as you could play creature removal in your deck, you could have at least a way to interact.
Yeah, you always had to kill the Electromancer, you always had to kill Baral.
Yeah. And in turn, like, a lot of the combo decks would learn to exploit that, like forcing their opponent to have removal while being able to progress their fair game plan. And that's a gameplay pattern I've really tried to express here. So, like, the Reanimator stuff, or the Storm type stuff, or a lot of the, like, less explicitly combo synergies, but that can play very similarly, like the Blink stuff. All of it is, like, designed in a way where most decks will have a chance to interact. But those decks don't require a huge commitment of resources. Like, there's a lot of looting in blue, and a lot of the Reanimator targets are designed to be, like, reasonably castable stuff in a longer game. Like, Grave Titan is a great example there, where it's pretty reasonable to play fairly. And, like, it feels great to get it into play on turn 4, it still feels fine to get it into play on turn 6. So there's a lot of, like, counterplay and counterplay built into the design there.
Yeah, I like how you described in your overview that you wanted to curate this to allow decks without counter magic or discard opportunities to interact. So like that it's set up in such a way that you don't have to have a hyper-specific tool to to fix what your opponent's doing.
Yeah.
Is that just like tempering what those threats are, or what the combo lines are, to make sure that they're not hyperlinear?
Yeah, very much so, I'd say. Like, some stuff I didn't include is, like, Empty the Warrens. Like, with the Stormscale Scion or the Dragon Storm, like, you can potentially get a big advantage, but your opponent can still kill a couple of your dragons and then try and fight back. Whereas Empty the Warrens often dumps out, like, 16 goblins or whatever, and spot removal just doesn't do anything for you anymore.
Right, and you have to almost explicitly have a Wrath or you're just dead.
Yeah.
So how do you balance that kind of interaction? Like, I know you had some thoughts specifically about, like, high-powered removal here.
Yeah, so, like, one of the things I want to emphasize in the design of the cube, and it's related to the thing I talked about earlier about cards from that era being very clean and the gameplay patterns that creates, is that I want decks to have a lot of weaknesses. Nowadays we get a lot more card advantage and a lot more flexible cards, which makes it very easy to, like, just ride card advantage to a win by forcing trades. And so my thought process with a lot of the higher power interaction in the cube, like, there's Pass, Swords, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt, all that good stuff. I want you to have to think about how this matches up with your opponent's stuff. Like, I have this Swords, but I don't want to have so much of that stuff that, like, you can just trade one for one forever. I actually have to think about, like, okay, what cards do I need this Swords for? Do I need 2 Swords their 1-drop against the aggro deck, or can I afford to wait a bit because I know they're going to play Silverblade Paladin or whatever, and I want to be able to kill that?
That feels a lot like the retail limited sensibility, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, I drafted a few good removal spells and I have to use them thoughtfully.
Yeah, that is kind of what I'm aiming for there. And again, like, I think that leans into the gameplay patterns of the era where, like, these days we have a lot of flexible answers like Prismatic Ending or whatever that can just deal with any kind of problem permanent, whereas that was actually a fairly rare thing. So there's also this emphasis on, like, okay, I might have a really good piece of creature interaction, but my opponent has an equipment or an enchantment or whatever. Those are much harder to answer. So you really need to be thinking about, like, how my answers line up with the threats in my opponent's deck and vice versa. You're trying to, like, generally manipulate the game state to where your cards line up good with your opponent's cards, and they're trying to do the same. To me, that's a lot of the, like, core of Magic's gameplay.
Yeah, and that seems like such a tough needle to thread in design, to, like, have a card in the realm of Swords to Plowshares in a what you've described as a standard powered environment beyond that.
Yeah. I have had one person who was really annoyed by Swords to Plowshares, so well, I don't know if that one will last, but from the very positive feedback I got, it seems like the idea is working generally.
I wonder if this resonates for you. I know I've heard some people describe that you can have high impact removal or high impact interaction, and it feels very different from high impact threats. Is that something that you felt here?
Yeah, definitely. Like, in most cases, people are less likely to notice losing to interaction than to the thing that's actually killing them.
Mm.
Same deal with like cantrips and card draw, which is another place where I've pushed the limits a bit. I do have brainstorming here because I love a brainstorm. Ultimately, I'm sure if you actually like played the cube 100 times or whatever and broke it down, you'd see a lot of flaws that I'd have to fix. But that's certainly not happening at a cube convention where nobody's drafting the cube twice. So right now I'm more focused on making sure things are fun and that people are enjoying it. And part of that is including like I've talked a lot about including iconic cards, and that includes the interaction and stuff like Brainstorm and Lightning Bolt and Swords to Plowshares and all that.
Well, absolutely. And not to over editorialize, but I think there is a risk sometimes of how we want to present this product that is perfect and infinitely redraftable. And it's like, it can be fun and interesting even if there are still rough edges.
Yeah.
And I think part of the rough edges are part of the interest.
Yeah, you got to remember, it's not going to be drafted an infinite number of times. And let's face it, we're cube designers. We're not going to be keeping it in the same state for very long anyway.
That's right. That's right. Well, you mentioned Brainstorm. I think one of the things that goes best with Brainstorm is the fetch lands. Do you want to talk about your mana base here?
Yeah, so I am a skeptic of soup. I guess particularly the relationship people tend to draw between having good fixing and seeing 5-color soup decks. I think there's a lot of other knobs you can tweak that have more control over that. Like, you can see that even in, like, Retail Limited, there are formats that have 5-color soup decks. Like, Original Modern Masters is a classic one, where one of the archetypes is just 5-color soup, despite there being literally 0 fixing lands in the entire set. And so, I talked a bit about, like, which cards I want to be first picked, and the quest cards, which are things that tend to wheel a lot of the time, unless people are specifically like going for them. And so one of the things I have emphasized here is like there is a bit of a power disparity in the cube. I think this is a thing that's very helpful to fight like the 5-color soup problem because it gives you a benefit for picking a good non-land card over a land. Like you will get noticeably stronger cards that way compared to something like Vintage Cube where there's kind of a flatter power band because it's just all the best cards.
Yeah. Well, and like here specifically, you're on double fetch, double shock, and surveil for every color. Plus a smattering of other things, of course. But like this means that you can get access to most colors, right?
Yeah. Like it's very much possible to draft a 5-color deck. Usually we see a 4 or 5-color deck in each pot at minimum. And there's some explicit encouragement to go in that direction, like the aforementioned Visit Reborn or whatever. But oftentimes I do see like these very lean and efficient 2 or 3-color decks doing well. Or like the winning deck from the top 8 of Shoebox was a red aggro deck splashing like 2 black cards. Made me very happy that Jackal Pup was in that deck, by the way.
That is so refreshing in the world of Ragavans. That it can still hang.
So one of the things I do there is have this power disparity. So a deck that's picking the best cards out of the first couple picks and then following along in those colors can do as well as a deck that's picking all the good lands and then whatever the best cards that are left over is. That's another lesson from Retail Limited, really, where there is a even higher power disparity than I have and how that influences things.
Do you think that as you're working on a cube like this, does it feel like it could ever get to a state that you would be... I don't want to say happy with, like you're not happy with it presently, but like that would feel solved or complete to you? Or do you think this is a project that would continually evolve?
There's probably a point where I won't be looking at new cards very much for the cube, where like I'll have found stuff that fits any weird niche I might still need a card that doesn't exist for yet. But I don't think it'll ever stop changing completely. Like I said, like the context the cube is being played in will shift. Right now, I'm thinking about it in terms of running it in more cube events because that went really well this time. I'm probably going to submit to KubeCon and stuff, and so I'm thinking about it in terms of, okay, a bunch of people are going to play this once, and I want them to have a good time and see all the cards they enjoy. But if I'm running it in my local play group every week instead, I'm going to start thinking very differently and looking towards, like, okay, what strategies are winning too much or appearing too much because I want to give people a more varied experience if they're playing it over and over again.
Yeah, do you think, based on your experience at Shoebox, has that like inspired you to make more changes to this cube, or is it inspired you to more to leave it where it is?
It's definitely inspired me to make some more changes. Like, as I've been running this locally, one of the things I've been doing is, like, I see an archetype that's not appearing very much, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to push this until I see it come together, and then pull back from there. And in the lead up to Shoebox, that had kind of been red-based aggro, because I'd seen a lot of, like, white-based aggro show up, but the red decks weren't really doing it. And so I added some more tools for those, and then at Shoebox, obviously, we had a couple red-based 3-0s, including in the top 8.
Mm.
And so I'm probably going to try and pull back on that a bit and see if I can find a better balance there. I do want to emphasize here, the important thing to me from part of what I'm taking away from this feedback is that, like, the balance issues don't matter so much, at least in this context. Like, people had a ton of fun, even if, like, white-black is still very strong and aggro is still very strong. And people who were not in those decks were still enjoying themselves because they were getting to do cool things. I know somebody in the top 8 was casting Cruel Ultimatums.
There you go.
And I'm always very happy to see that one. I had somebody get really excited and show me their deck. They had gotten a late Niv Mizzet Reborn, and were kind of scrambling for cards to play with it. So they had Jace the Mind Sculptor and Gore Clan Rampager in the same deck. And I think they went like 2-1 or 1-2, but they were just so thrilled with how much fun they were having with that deck.
That's so cool. What a mix. Yeah, Heather, I'd love for you to say more about that. Like, how do you receive feedback on a project like this, and then what do you do with it?
Yeah. Obviously, there's kind of two aspects to the feedback, right? On the one hand, I'm getting all this data, and I'm looking over all of the deck list pictures, and I'm like, okay, so these archetypes are showing up a lot. These ones are not. Like, what can I do about that? But I'm also, like, looking for those stories. Like, what was it that got people excited? What can I do to, like, make those things happen more? I remember I was checking in on one of the drafts of my cube, and I saw somebody just playing Baneslayer Angel and being, like, so excited that Baneslayer Angel was good here.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, prioritizing over technical perfection, making sure the cards people are excited about are cards that you can have fun with and feel good about playing in the cube.
That's great. What do you feel like you have learned in the development life of this cube so far?
The biggest lesson here is those stories for me. Like, I did think a lot about, like, the technical aspects of, like, oh, what is too good, what is not at first. And like I said, I've kind of eased off on that and been trying to emphasize more, like, crafting the narrative of the cube there. Really emphasizing, again, like, those cards that are, like, if you win with this once, you're going to feel great, so that everybody's having fun, even if they're not winning. Like, for an example, from one night I particularly remember, like, the guy who 3-0'd was pretty happy with his really, like, sleek mono-white aggro deck. Obviously, the people winning are usually having a good time. But then the people in the 0-2 match were, like, one of them was the person I mentioned who used Iron Crag Feet Walking Ballista. And then their opponent got them in this, like, 5-color pile by Become Immense Teamer Battle Raging their Terramander.
Outstanding.
Yeah. So, like, that's the kind of thing I'm looking to make happen. Like, the thing I'm happiest about with this cube is that even when a deck is bad, it's bad in a cool way. Where it's like, I've got a bunch of really wacky cards here that shouldn't be together, but I can at least do something with this and make it work. And that also ties into the gameplay stuff I've talked about, where, like, I want decks to have weaknesses so that even if you have a weird pile, you can have moments where you're like, oh, wait, I have this card in here that lines up really, really well with my opponent's cards, and I can find a path to win here anyway.
That's great. So even if you're not flying, you're still falling with style.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. When I'm looking at this cube, one of the biggest ways I'm thinking of it is, like, I want to highlight the core mechanics of Magic, particularly, like, the core resource progression of Magic, because I think this is the era where that was kind of, like, at its most important. Before that, you tended to have these much slower games where, like, there just weren't good aggressive tools, so you had these insanely long grindy card advantage battles or weird combo decks that were hard to deal with. And then in the modern era, you have, like I mentioned, all this card advantage and all this flexibility. So there's a lot of, like, building engines and fighting over key pieces to get ahead of your opponent. Whereas in this kind of 2012 to 2018 era, there's this big emphasis on, like, the progression of the game, right? Like, as you go through a game of Magic, naturally you're going to gain more mana and you're going to have fewer cards. And the most important skill in the game is like evaluating your cards and knowing when they're better. Like we talk about stuff like, oh, who's the beatdown? That's a question of like whose cards are going to get better as the game goes on and whose cards are going to get worse.
Yeah.
And so this progression kind of defines like the early game where you're constrained on mana and now you have plenty of cards, and the mid game where you're flush with both, and then the late game where you have plenty of mana but very few cards.
And you're kind of navigating the bottleneck when those flows change.
Yeah. And so when I'm looking at the cube, a lot of like I talk a lot about like making sure people can be flexible in how they build their decks. A big way I do that is look at myself and ask like, okay, when is this card good and what other cards are good in that period of the game, and making sure like archetypes have a variety of options in that regard. Like the artifact deck has a lot of cards that are good early, like Signal Pester and Soul Artifact that you want to like beat down with. And then there's also cards like Shroom and Trading Posts that encourage you to go much later and grindier. And I think one of the core skills this cube emphasizes is like knowing which cards go together, like, and when your deck is trying to end the game. I know a lot of cubes will be a lot more flexible in that, where it's like, oh, like the Sun Titan or whatever is just really good and you're putting it in any white deck, even like an aggro deck. And that's something I wanted to like try and avoid here. Like that's part of the stuff I talked about with Soup, is like trying to encourage that kind of efficient deck building and like thinking about how you want the game to go.
These are considerations that go beyond just mana value, right? Like you kind of mentioned Signal Pest to Shroom. Yes, that's a difference of 1 to 6, but it's more than that, right? Like it's kind of about how those cards are used once
like
they hit the battlefield.
I guess a good example of like a couple cards at the same mana value is like Dark Confidant's a great example here, right? Where like it is very much a mid-game card. You don't want to jam this into a deck that's trying to go way too late because the damage will add up over time, especially in a Fetch Shock format. You want it in an aggro deck, but a lot of the time still anyway, but like sometimes you're going to want to prioritize other stuff over it because an aggro deck is aiming to end the game very quickly before you can deploy all that card advantage you're getting from it. So it really encourages you, if you want to maximize it, and you probably do because it's one of the strongest cards in the cube, is you want to be playing a mid-range deck. You want to try and jam like Jund or whatever, and get to the point in the game where you have the mana to play all those cards, but not so late that the life cost starts to risk your game plan.
Yeah, greatness at any cost.
Yeah. And then at the same mana value, you have something like Iron Shield Elf, where like, okay, this is letting you trade cards to keep attacking with your threat. And it's accentuated by supporting like the very aggressive Madness stuff, where you're getting to play cards for cheap, and you want to win the game while you're able to leverage that mana advantage before you would have gotten to play all your cards naturally.
And that's interesting that like those two cards could play together in an interesting way too. Where like if like Dark Confidant is able to supply cards that you can feed to the elf to keep it going, for example.
Yeah, like you can play them together and you still be fine doing that a lot of the time, but they can also pull you in very different directions dependent. Like if I have an Iron Shield Elf in my pool and I don't have Dark Confidant, I'm going to look for much more aggressive cards than if I have a Dark Confidant and no Iron Shield Elf.
Yeah. It's kind of like the same sort of, not exactly tension, but comparison between like a counterspell and a remand in the same slot. Kind of like a tempo versus a hard control.
That's another great example. I have both of those in there. Like the hard control deck is going to deprioritize remand because it wants to trade off cards and get to that late game stage where turning mana into cards is good. And you can play all your card draw spells or your expensive planeswalkers that generate card advantage. And then remand keeps both players flush on cards. It prolongs the earlier phases of the game. So it does the opposite of what a control deck wants in a lot of cases, even if it's still like solid there.
It's like going to play on a different axis or play to a different goal.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. I imagine another tricky needle to thread to try to find how do you give a variety of options that don't all just fit together in the same setup.
I'm very careful about like redundancy in this cube. One of the things I'm looking at right now is like I have Silent Departure and Just the Wind as my 2 bounce spells, and both those have like kind of discard synergy in a sense. Like one of them has Flashback and one of them has Madness, and I'm looking at that and I'm like, okay, can I maybe swap one of these for something that gives more variety there, like help support other decks better.
And just for curiosity, is that something you're trying to look for a card in this era, or is this the sort of thing that you're looking into new cards to try to fill those spots?
I think there's plenty of bounce spells in this era. Like I might even put a straight up just unsummon in there,
Nice.
replacing one of them, because the instant speed ability to save your own creature is very useful there, and having that at 1 mana presents another angle to use the card.
And hey, if you want to use Unsummon, that's another alpha card that you could add in there.
True. That never hurts.
Well, Heather, as we think about HeatherCube, what advice would you want to share with other designers as they consider their own projects?
One of the big lessons for me is consider whether or not people will read your cards. Is actually something I've learned a lot of, and comes from a lot of the cubes I've played as well. Like, cards people recognize get drafted much higher than cards people don't. And like I mentioned with the Dissection Tools example, I've seen people argue that Dissection Tools is even stronger than Batterskull, but it still goes way later in the drafts I've run, because people know Batterskull and they don't know Dissection Tools.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the time people see cards they know and know are good and don't bother reading Dissection Tools until it's like later in the pack and they have no obvious picks left.
Or on their opponent's side of the board.
Yeah. And like, obviously this is a nostalgia cube, so I have a very high density of like cards people know. One of the pieces of feedback I got from the event organizers is that my cube runs incredibly cleanly and efficiently. At one point I got told, like, yeah, your cube finished 20 minutes ahead of all the other cubes. But like, I've seen in a lot of other cubes that are trying to do something that requires a broader range of cards, people don't think about this aspect, and then drafters gravitate towards the cards they recognize, and stuff that really shouldn't go late goes very late.
And that's just like a question of familiarity, I guess, right? Like, if your players are prone to slow down, then maybe you have more liberty to include more of those things.
Yeah. Like, last year I won a Gaia's Cradle in a weird, not quite a cube draft event. It was like custom packs this guy made out of his cards he owned that were like, you keep what you draft kind of deal.
Kind of a repack thing.
Yeah. But yeah, I won a Gaia's Cradle because I was the only person reading all the Universes Beyond Commander junk in there and got a bunch of cards I really shouldn't have. Shout out to Shadow something Assassin from Final Fantasy. It's like if Broadside Bombardiers was a skull clamp. But nobody's ever heard of the card, so it got passed to me and won me quite a few games.
Too many assassins. Let me see if I can... Oh, Shadow Mysterious Assassin.
Yeah, that's the guy.
What a weird card.
So, do take into account what cards your drafters will read and how that affects what they will pick.
That's great. Well, Heather, this is great, and I'm so appreciative to you for taking the time to walk us through so much of this. Before I let you go, I do want to ask one of my favorite questions, which is, if you could have any card printed as a promo, what card would you pick, and who would you have do the illustration?
What I'd have to go with here is Tarmogoyf by Steve Argyle.
Okay, very cool.
Because he did all the other cards in Modern Jund from back in the day.
Yes.
Like Liliana, Bloodbraid, Deathrite. Like, he did all of them, but not Tarmogoyf. So I need him to do Tarmogoyf so that we have we can get the full deck.
So to properly unite all the cards under the artist. That's great. Well, and Steve Argyle has done bunches and bunches of cards over the years, so I think a great choice.
I have his I forgot this was him. I have the DCI promo Wooly Thoktar in there too, in the cube.
Oh yeah. That's the good stuff.
Yeah. He is one of the most iconic artists, specifically from that era of cards, not just in general.
Well, Heather, again, thank you so much. This has been so fun for me, and I love hearing your dissection of thoughts here. That you're very intentional about so much of what you're doing, and I'm so stoked that you had such a great experience at Shoebox and getting to share that with so many people who were so receptive to that. So thank you for taking the time to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been a wild trip to go from, again, not thinking I wouldn't even be in the event to here.
That's so great. Well, again, thank you so much. Here's hoping there's more chances to connect in the future and more chances to put HeatherCube out in the world.
Yeah, hopefully I will get to. I'm going to be sending it to more cube events since this one went so well. So if you do want to draft the cube and you can't make it to an event, I usually run it at Cube Games in Eden Prairie, Minnesota.
Sweet. Go get your draft on.
Hopefully the people listening will get a chance to play it sometime.
You You did mention that you had a story about your experience in the top 64.
Yes, so I decided in the top 64 to draft my own cube and got punished for that by losing to my own Settle the Wreckage that I put in because I didn't play around it.
The hubris of cube designers.
Yep. Pure hubris.
That's amazing.